All right, so welcome to this episode of All Things Locks. Now we got a very special guest, and I love this topic. We got John Askin, who is a financial advisor out of Allied Wealth Partners based in New Jersey, and we're going to be talking about everything financial, especially related to healthcare, which is a topic that unfortunately doesn't get discussed quite as much. So, John, welcome to the show. Glad you can make it.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So I kind of just want to get right into it. I just really want to touch on a little bit more of your background first, like how you got into finances. That's not an area a lot of people gravitate towards. So kind of what you
Yeah.
brought you to that. And then you do have a focus where you're working specifically with more healthcare practitioners. So I'd be curious to know what kind of got you down that route as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, like you said, it's the typical finance route is like the corporate structure, right? You're going to go into New York City, or at least where I live in New Jersey. It's go to New York City, work at one of the big banks or investment firms. And I never really wanted to go down that route. So I studied finance in college, went to Monmouth University, been a Jersey guy my whole life, and was an athlete as well. And that'll kind of tie into why I got into the healthcare space. But I gravitated and took an internship in financial planning actually my sophomore year, and really liked it. Liked the client facing side. Everyone kind of told me you should always go into some sort of like sales role or being with people all day long. And I agreed. I like meeting people. I like meeting new people. Wasn't afraid of reaching out and saying, hey, this is who I am. This is what I do. So I found Allied Wealth Partners. The reason I went with them was because I like the independent model, right? I didn't want to be tied to one insurance company or, like a wirehouse, like a Morgan Stanley, where, they have certain minimums and everything. I wanted to really do build my own business within a business. And, I was willing to take a chance on myself because the fail out rate in our industry is very high. Depending on what numbers you look at, there's somewhere as high as 97% of advisors fail within their first 3 years when they start out of college. So I took a risk on myself. Being an athlete, it wasn't something that I really looked at as like a bad thing. It was more of here's a challenge, go into an industry where most people in your situation fail and try to make it. And, when you first get into this industry as an advisor, it's pretty much anyone with a pulse is like your target client. It's like I just need to survive. I had to, thankfully was able to live at home for a little bit, so I didn't have a lot of bills. But it's, find anyone that that will be willing to work with you, and you're reaching out to friends, families, aunts, uncles, friends' parents, and it's a little bit awkward. It's like, hey, listen, I'm this guy right out of college, and let me tell you how to handle your finances. And what I found was it not there's so much number one bad information out there that people are following, but also like just because someone's older than you doesn't mean they necessarily know more about a certain topic. And I started to realize that, so it got me a little bit more confident in the process. But I had always heard you need to find a niche, right? And asking John in college had no idea what that meant, right? It's like, okay, like I'm an athlete, I go into finance, everyone has the pulse. That's my niche. But started to kind of think about things. And as I started to grow my book of business and got some clients, so kind of take you back to college and we'll come full circle on this story, but I was a soccer player, Division I athlete at Monmouth, and my sophomore year, I was getting ready to play. We were going to play West Virginia, who was ranked in the top 25. I'd been a starter the previous year, my freshman year, which was pretty uncommon, and planned to start going into my sophomore year. And I was at the practice the day before my birthday, the day before we were going to play West Virginia. Took a cut on like a walkthrough session, and lo and behold, tore my ACL. So, and this was me a sophomore year, had no idea what I was going to do with my career. Got told the worst news of my life. Never had as much as like a bone bruise injury before. So 0 to 100, and ended up getting really close with the PTs that I worked with. PTs. Obviously, I got pretty close with the surgeon. They kind of fall off after a little bit. But the PT was actually a Monmouth grad. He played soccer there. He went down the route that, of becoming a PT, and we hit it off. We knew the same things. We talked about soccer all day long, and, recovered very quickly, and then go to my junior year and just kind of forgot about it. Like, didn't think that I would be working with these type of people at that time. And then when I started getting into the field and becoming an advisor, I actually reached out to him. And I said, hey, man, this is what I'm doing. His name's Wes. And said, hey, Wes, this is what I'm doing. I'd love to tell you about it. I know you're young. You just kind of starting a family and things. Would love to talk to you and just tell you what I'm doing. And during our conversation, there was a lot of things that he was starting to ask me. And I was like, oh, I thought you would know that. You know what I mean? Like one of those things, like to me, who had been doing this every day, I thought everyone knew. And I wasn't telling everyone anything that was all new. And so he really started asking me questions. I'm like, there might be something there. So long, he became a client, ended up becoming a client of mine, great client. And then actually got like a couple of referrals to other people that were in the healthcare space. And this was probably about year one, right? End of year one, I'd started reaching out and just getting referrals from these types of people and started to like speak their language. And then I kind of sat down and said, okay, clearly there's a need here, right? And where there's a need, you can pretty much start a business, right? It's like any business. Find a problem, you're the solution, charge people money to implement that solution. And sat down with him and then basically just approached him and said, hey, listen, I'd love to just sit down with you for like an hour and just ask you questions, not as my client, but more of like what you're seeing and what you wish you knew coming out of school or wish you knew now or 10 years from now. And again, like I said, I found that there was this gap in, number one, they're a very underserved market because most people kind of gravitate towards like surgeons and doctors. And I have some clients that are in that space, but not the majority of them. PTs, they're coming out with these massive loans and OTs as well. I will say PTs, but it's kind of that PTOT, sometimes speech language pathologists as well. But I just talking to them. They're like, my loans are so high. I have a lot of debt. I'm making pretty good money for the average American. They're not making 300,000, but maybe like 100. Older ones maybe 150. And then also the ones that started practices, I just started seeing like they need a lot of help. That they probably got their advice from a friend or a colleague, and that's what they implemented. And hopefully it wasn't 20 years of implementing something like that. It was only maybe a couple, but just started having conversations and then started gravitating towards that audience and really feeling like if I can speak their language because I was a patient before, I understand what that process is like and I can make financial planning, which seems to be like this complex, fearful. People are scared of reaching out to an advisor. They don't want to feel like they don't have enough money or that they're talking a different language and all these terms. And I just kind of leaned on that and it's been probably about 2.5 years now of focusing in that space. And it's been great. I've made number one great connections. It's kind of how we're talking through LinkedIn. That's where I post a lot of content. Have great clients now. So, sky's the limit with this space. I'm going to continue to grow. Like I said, I started this in 2022, getting in the field. So in the grand scheme of my career, it is new. But that's kind of my story. I know it was a little bit elaborated there, but that's what kind of got me into this space. And it kind of just fell on me. Like I wasn't planning on this by any means.
There's a lot to unpack there. You said a few things that I think really are great take home messages for people, which is utilizing your resources, right? So it's like you didn't just start, get into the profession and then just kind of, sit around and twiddle your thumbs and just, kind of wait for people to come to you. You reached out to somebody you've worked with in the past and you just said, hey, look, this is what I'm doing. Like, who else could benefit from this? And I do think that's an avenue that a lot of people don't take, right? It's just like, I'm going to go on social media, talk about what I do. Maybe I'll spend some money on ads and then just kind of see what happens versus like, you got stuff you could do for free. It's just actually reaching out to people and
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
One for sure. And then, you talked about just getting into a field that has a very high failure rate. We don't have to go into like necessarily why that is, but just what I think the aspect of betting on yourself, like you said, which is something that a lot of us, don't do. How many people stay in jobs that they absolutely hate because they don't want to bet on themselves? So what was it about that aspect of getting to something where you're like, I know the chances are I might fail, but I'm going to do it anyway? Like, what enabled you to actually kind of take that step and go down that route?
Yeah. So, I mean, thankfully I had a couple family friends that had been in the industry and had been able to pick their brains. And, I remember one of my family friends was talking to me and he was an independent advisor as well, formerly in New York City, but had been a career changer, and basically started from scratch. And, he had told me a couple things where he's like, listen, you're gonna start out in your career and you're gonna be, overworked and underpaid, right? You're going to work an extreme amount of hours. You're going to feel like you're getting so underpaid and doing things that you're like, why am I doing this? And then there's going to be an inflection point where you're going to feel like you're underworked and overpaid. And not in a bad way. He wasn't saying like, oh, you're getting overpaid. It was more of like, you're doing very well for yourself, supporting your family, living a good life. And the hours that are required to do that aren't going to be there as much because of all the time that you put in and were willing to sacrifice in the beginning. And I looked at that as like, when I looked at my life and made out my 15, 20-year plan, like obviously want to get married, have kids, live in a nice area. Um, but I wanted time freedom. I had been around family, friends growing up where their fathers really weren't around for their sports games, right? That was always like mom was picking them up, or I was blessed to have a mother who worked at home and a father who was very flexible because he had been working in a business and was a business owner in a sense. So had more flexibility. And then I also had friends who parents probably made more money, but also at the same time, they were going to New York City at 6 in the morning and they weren't getting home until 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. So they weren't really involved. So when I looked at my career, I said, okay, I'm in my 20s. I can take a lot of risk now because I don't have a wife, I don't have kids, I don't have a mortgage, I can live at home. I can essentially afford to start a business. And with all those things kind of putting together of where I saw myself in 20 years of if I put in this work now, I can have that life for myself, but I have to be willing to sacrifice now. I had friends that were going out and starting 120, $130,000 a year salary plus bonus at banks, but they were also working 60, 70-hour weeks in the summer when no one wants to do that. And I remember, I'll kind of tell a story here, which will probably hit home to people about, and this is more focused towards like practice owners. And I always relate to that of like, you're going to start out and it's going to be a grind, right? It's not easy, right? If it were easy, every single PT in person would go do this, right? But what does it look like 10, 15 years from now if you put in the work? And again, I wasn't like uberly successful in the beginning or anything like that. But I remember I sat down and one of the senior advisors here. I had basically, I'm a big Georgia Bulldogs fan, and they played in the national championship. If you remember when they played TCU, it was in California, and I got a really close friend that had gotten a ticket, and he texted me saying, this is like January, and I had started in November. He texted me saying, hey, dude, I got a ticket. Like, just get a flight. And for me, that was like a bargain because I'm like, all right, flight's going to be like $500 round trip, but the ticket's probably going to be 2 grand. Like, bingo, let's do this. I remember going to my senior advisor manager and saying, hey, listen, I have this. Like, am I allowed to go? Almost like asking permission from, not a boss, but someone who was older saying, am I allowed? He said, listen, dude, you're allowed to work as hard or as little as you want in this career. And he wasn't saying it to like, I guess, gaslight me and be like, oh, well, it's up to you. You shouldn't go and you want to be successful. He was being serious of, do you want, you can work as hard or as not, and you can create your own schedule. And that's when it clicked. I was like, well, if I go to this trip, like I can work an extra Saturday, or I can go find another client tomorrow and have it like paid for, right? There's no like clock in at 9, leave at 5, clock in at 9, leave at 5. And that's when I was like, wow, like this is my first year in the career, and no one was telling me how to build it, which is scary, but at the same time kind of empowering of like, if I can figure this thing out, I can, spend more time with my family on a weekday at 12 o'clock and go do, I can take a vacation 5 times a year if I want to. And no one's telling me not, as long as my clients are happy and, I'm happy with my results. There's nothing stopping me from doing that. So that's why ultimately I went down this path. I mean, it's been a good decision now looking back. I'm so thankful. I can't see myself doing anything else. I mean, I have friends that tell me, "Oh, like we go on like trips, buddies, golf trips and stuff." As you can tell, I'm a big golfer, and they're like, "Oh, like what was your PTO for this?" And I'm like, I couldn't even tell you how PTO works if I tried. You know what I mean? Like I don't know, and they're so dumbfounded by it. But that's really the idea behind, being self-employed, and a lot of people like that. But it's also not all sunshine and rainbows, right? There's gonna be days that are hard. I'm sure we'll get into that. But that's kind of full circle, like I said, why I got into this and why I said, you know what, if I can grind out in my 20s and make it work, my 30s, my 40s, my 50s, my 60s, we're gonna be so much easier than if I chose the other route.
And that's really the right. I mean, that's definitely the right way to do it. You do get a lot of younger individuals, and they're just like, "Hey, my 20s is for me, like partying and going out and getting shit faced in the
Yeah.
time and a place." And it's like I want to party when I'm 20, and then I'll start getting to work and more serious when I'm like in my 30s. and then they're like, shit, it's like not too late, but it's like way harder. And we'll
Yeah,
we'll definitely talk about like just the aspect of starting investing when you're in your 20s, but like even just working
absolutely.
itself is like 20s is like the best time to, like you said, grind. You have no family, most people, less responsibilities. Like, why would you wait when it's like, hey, now I'm like maybe getting married and thinking of having kids, and now let me start working like 60 hours a week to really build a career instead of
Yeah,
doing it.
Gary Vee says it great. I don't know if you listen to Gary Vee, but some of the things I agree with, some of I don't. But like his big thing is, if you screw up, like you're not screwing up a heck of a lot. There's not kids that are need food on the table, your wife that needs a roof over. You know what I mean? Like if you're living at home, it's like, all right, you screwed up, but at least you learned and you tried. So that was my philosophy is like, you know, I wasn't going to let myself fail being an athlete, but if there was a chance by any place, if I did, like I could always do something else, right? I could figure it out. It wasn't as high stakes as maybe someone in their 40s and they're going from 300K a year salary to now nothing and saying, hey, I'm an advisor. Like I need to find people to work with. So yeah.
Mitigate your risk, so to speak. But
Yes.
really appreciate that for sure. Now, as we get into like, so let's kind of like dive a little bit into investing specifically. So overall, you said like just the financial education in this country. Honestly, I disagree or agree, but I think sucks. We really
I agree. Yeah.
on it. Um, and it's just across the board. But let's dive into like the younger generation first. Like you said, they're coming out of school, have a lot of debt, and this is obviously, we're talking about physical therapists, occupational therapists, but then you talk about doctors. They're like, all right, I got 400
Yeah. Yeah.
thinks I'm wealthy because I'm in healthcare. So outside of the struggles, what do you say to somebody when they're like, John, I can't invest, man. I got to pay back my loans, and then on top of it, I'm trying to figure out how to get a house
Hmm.
and maybe get a car. So talk to the population who's like, why would I invest when I'm 24, 25 and coming out with six figures worth of debt?
Yeah. So that is a huge topic. And a lot of times, a lot of my younger clients, they come in with lots of debt, and that's their biggest concern. It's scary, right? To say, I basically have a mortgage, but it's not a place to live. It's what I already did, for the last 6 years. So it's not that there's a cut and dry answer all the time, right? Number one, it does depend. And that's like our favorite term in financial planning. It depends, right? It's probably same in healthcare when you're sitting down with a patient and they're saying, well, my knee hurts. And you're like figuring it out. But then they're like, all right, what do we do? It's like, well, it depends. Um, However, right, I always tell a lot of younger people in healthcare, it's not that you should only focus on one thing. You can do both, but a lot of times the biggest issues I'm seeing is a lack of awareness on cash flow, right? They're not aware of what's going in and going out, right? If you can get a grip on what's going in and what's going out, I'm not saying don't live your life. You're young, like you said, I'm not saying don't go out. I still go out, like I have a good time, but it's what really are your priorities. And then when you look at the loans, right, and saying, okay, interest rates are a big thing. I won't get too detailed into that, but when you look at your interest rates, I've seen, I've sat down with PTs and they've got like really low interest rates on their loans. And then we've talked to them and said, like, well, if you were able to invest this in something that was going to get you, maybe 7 or 8% a year, and your rate was only 3, right? Well, then maybe it makes sense to, instead of trying to pay down those loans faster and put more money towards that, pay whatever you're required, take the rest, and to start investing, right? Because if you're going to get 8 and you're only getting charged 3, you're winning, right? You're getting 5% more, right? Now, if it's the opposite, maybe it doesn't make sense because if you're getting charged 12% and you can only go find an investment that's going to get you 5, 6, or 7, well, you're going to lose every time. So you should go at that a little more aggressively. So that's one thing I look at is interest rates are big. And a lot of times no one looks at that. They're just like, it is what it is. Um, Another thing is I've seen a lot of people not taking advantage of things like their employer match, right? So if you're working for an employer and they say, I can't contribute to my 401k just because, I need to put all my money towards my loans or I need to save up for a house, right? A lot of times you hear in our industry like that employer match is basically free money, which it pretty much is. It's like if you're going to put 4% in and your employer says, we'll match you 4, right? If you contribute 4% of your salary, we'll match up to that 4%. Well, if you only contribute 2%, let's say you're making 100 grand, if they're going to match $4,000, you're leaving $2,000 on the table that you really didn't have to do anything but just show up and do your job and be employed there to get that. So a lot of times we'll say take advantage of the match, right? And then also like if anything's extra, okay, maybe it might make sense to throw a little extra towards those loans. So The other thing is the power of compounding, which I'm sure most people have heard about if they're on like, social media and it's yeah. So again, the numbers of if you do start earlier, the amount you're going to feel nothing in the beginning. That's the unfortunate part of investing is everyone wants to see a rate of return quickly.
Compounding interest, right?
Compounding interest, correct, right? And the fact that your money can grow and eventually that money starts making more money than you ever put into it, right? But the problem I see is there's a lot of behavioral finance that goes into it. And that's pretty much, I always call myself like I'm a money therapist half the time, right? Because everyone think you take out your calculator and you do, okay, if I contribute, let's say $500 a month and I get a 7% rate of return and I do that for 40 years, I'll have $1 million or whatever the numbers is. It seems easy on that calculator, but then once you realize how long 40 years is, it's a little bit harder to actually stick to that over 40 years. So that's number one thing I see is people not sticking to it and trying to get too cute and changing things. But someone who starts in their 20s versus someone who starts in their 30s, I mean, you could just run the numbers, and I don't have a calculator on me right now, but there's tons of things out there that you can look and say if you start in your 20s versus if you start in your 30s, just doing something, you'll have to invest maybe a fraction of what someone did who started later because you're allowing that money to start compounding sooner. And it's that graph that we always see of it seems like nothing's happening for like the first 15 years. And then all of a sudden it really starts to take off in those later years. It's also why, most people in this country that are the wealthiest are older because they've had compounding working for them, right? They've had all those years to let that money grow and compound. So, biggest thing is if you're a PT and you're sitting there in OT or in healthcare and you're saying like, I don't know what to do, having a plan and just implementing it is better than nothing, right? And deciding like if you really want to have a house in a couple years and you're in a different situation than your colleagues, like don't do what they do, right? Because there might be I'm 24, right? There could be a 24-year-old who is married and has a kid already. Well, they're not maybe not going to be able to invest as much as me, but at the same time, like they have a family and they're blessed and they want to buy a house to raise that family. And well, there's nothing wrong with them saying, I'm going to do the house purchase and save for that, pay off my loans, and maybe I got to start a little bit later on this investing thing, right? It's not that that's a bad decision. It's really it needs to be unique to you, and I think that's where a lot of people go wrong is they assume it's this universal rule that it has to be this amount at this age and like it's really not the case. Financial planning is so personal. But again, on the loans, it's a topic we talk about. I mean, we could go on for hours about that, and I'm trying to keep it enough broad enough so that it can apply to more people because everyone's situation is different. But the math is out there showing that the sooner you start, the more you'll end up having if you invest right and stay disciplined.
You said, and the important aspect there too, like you said, is like having a plan. Like you started out like I looked 15, 20 years where the hell I wanted to be, and
Yeah.
most people don't do that, right? It's like we're looking like maybe 15 days ahead,
Yeah.
and then like trying to
Yeah.
figure out why I have no savings when I'm
Mhm.
getting older or when I'm trying to execute on stuff. So having an idea of like where you want to be is going to be important, and then like I said, you see even like investing yourself, like take out a calculator, like I mean. For God's sake, like information is the easiest it's ever been now. So even if like I don't have a
Yes.
calculator, like I don't know, Bard, like ChatGPT, like just punch it in. If I put
Yeah. You can go to ChatGPT now. Yeah.
like $200 a month in, which really shouldn't be that much, it's like that's doable for most people. It's like
Yeah.
and you're like, holy shit, that's a pretty big pile for not putting
Of
a whole
money.
lot in. Yeah, and then like you said, the aspect of if you have an employer match, most employers I find don't utilize that, even though to your point, it is free money.
Yeah.
And then we don't have to like spend a whole time on this, but like even utilizing if you have the ability to do like a Roth
Hmm.
401k if your company does it. So we don't have to like get into that, but if you guys don't know what a Roth account is, like please like talk to someone like John and like get educated on that because that is a massive difference for sure. That I wish like I knew.
Absolutely.
That's one of those things where like if I knew then what I know now, like I wish back when I started investing, I knew about a Roth account because I didn't get the education even from my parents who invested in IRAs. I'm like, man, I wish I knew this. It would have helped me out so much more. So outside of starting young for the Gen Z employees, now we get into a little bit more of somebody who's owning a clinic.
Hmm.
What are some of the challenges you see with those individuals? Especially, it's like, all right, I've been in business for 10 years. Like, I'm good. Some of them like, I'm good now. I got this, figure it out. What are still some of the things that you see where you're like, all right, you could do this and that a little bit better?
Yeah. Yeah. So people in that situation very different than someone who's maybe going to stay a clinician their entire career and is okay with being an employee and doesn't really want the responsibility. But if you are in this boat, there's two things that I see a lot, right? The first thing is kind of going back to what I said before is cash flow, right? And it's one thing to have personal cash flow, but it's another thing to have personal cash flow and business cash flow. And a lot of owners, and really it's not their fault. They just weren't taught this stuff and they just kind of got into business because they know how to work with people and heal them. They weren't taught about money in school. They commingle things so often is personal and business get commingled. It's usually like personal is almost what's left over, or I've also seen where like I take too much personal and there's not enough to grow the business, right? And there's no right or wrong answer, but you need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And a lot of owners, when I ask them questions of like, why are you doing this or what's this for? That's just how we've always done it, is usually the answer. Like, I don't really know. That's kind of how I've always done it. So figuring out what your numbers look like is crucial. And this kind of ties into my second point of a lot of owners, and maybe 10 years might be too soon, but depends on the practice and how many there are, clinics and everything. But they are the key employee, meaning if they're not there, clinic's gone, right? And there needs to be a point, and I've seen where they say, I just can't give up the money, or I'm afraid that the money's going to go away if I stop treating and I focus more on the business side of things, which can be scary, right? I get that. Right now, I'm the key employee. If I go away in my practice, like there is no financial planning practice for me. But it's also in the business of, becoming a clinician and then becoming an owner of a private practice. A lot of times they look at that as their retirement. Like my practice is my retirement, which you're not wrong, but the problem is, think about it from a buyer's perspective, right? Let's say your practice is worth $4 million, and you're like, listen, John, like you're telling me to invest in my retirement account. I'm already maxing it out. Like, I don't think I need to do more because I got this practice that's probably worth 4 million. And let's say they did a whole evaluation, it's worth 4 million, right? If I'm a buyer, I'm gonna come in and say, you know, Dan, you got this practice. How many employees you got? Maybe they say like, I got like 30 employees or so. They're like, okay, in your main location that does most revenue, like if you were to not be there anymore, like retire, what does your revenue look like? And a lot of times it falls apart because you're the head clinician, you're running the show, you're doing everything, and if you're not there, there's not as much money for the business, the buyer to make, right? So a lot of times owners don't even realize that of like they're their own worst enemy in that sense when it comes to their retirement of they're not planning so that they can get out of the business and work on it versus work in it. And it's a hard thing I see because you spent all that time in school to become someone that is working with people on a daily basis. You maybe worked for an employer for like maybe a decade and then decided I want to do my own thing and have more autonomy. But you never got to that next step of if I'm going to leave this business, I need to start focusing on how this can operate when I'm not here. If I'm not around. And there's a great guy, I don't know if you know Jamie Schreier, but he talks about this stuff a lot on LinkedIn and social media of, figuring out how you can make this business run for you, because that makes your retirement, from my perspective, when I look at that and saying, well, if your business can run on autopilot, you're like a buyer's dream, right? They can buy you and say, you're good, we'll pay you off, and you can ride off into the sunset into retirement. Most private practices I see are not that. So there's almost like not, I don't know, maybe like an error, or like they're saying like, oh, my retirement's my business, like I'm good. And then they're kind of shocked when we talk about, well, you thought it was worth 4, but maybe you're only going to get like 750,000 for it. Retirement looks a lot different in that scenario. And if you're not saving outside and getting money out of the business, so like I said, knowing your numbers, number one, you need to know your numbers cold. In the middle of the night, you need to say like, EBITDA is a big thing. What does that look like? What is that? What is bring on a new employee going to cost you? What is buying new equipment going to cost you? Like all that type of stuff that people are going to want to know. And then number two, focusing on building wealth, not just in the business, but outside of the business for yourself, because you need to make sure that you're protecting yourself in a sense of if that business isn't there, you're going to have to start over or you screwed.
Yeah, I mean that's you brought up some really good points there. We had Chad Peterson on a few episodes ago who is all about mergers and acquisitions, and he talks about the same thing, right? It's all about cash flow, and then again, like what does the next person who wants to buy your business looking like. So if it's, hey, you're the owner who does everything and now you're gone, this company's not worth as much as it used to be. So,
Yeah.
and that kind of to me goes back to your point about, all right, you got into this running a business, running a clinic for a reason, but did you think about what the end game was, right? How
Mhm.
long you wanted to do this? And even on talking to Chad, it was like, at what point do you lose your passion, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's where a lot of people like, oh, I'm so sick and tired of running this shit already. But like healthcare is obviously not getting any easier from a standpoint of dealing with insurance with regards to
Yep.
denials and reimbursements. And it's like, I'm going to try to hold on to this as long as I can, but I'm kind of starting to hate being here. And yeah, it's like you're probably not growing it. And maybe you
Yeah.
should have had a succession plan, so to speak, or like a plan to sell maybe like 5 years ago instead of like, all right, things are going downhill. Let me start thinking about selling it now. It's like now's the worst time to do that. So that is for
Correct.
yeah, good point you brought up, and just knowing your numbers, which is something a lot of business owners don't really have a great concept of. Of we hate numbers, but then you want to run a business, like kind of doesn't go hand in hand.
Yeah. And I've seen it. I see it a lot. You're great at what you do, right? They're phenomenal. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to know anything about that, but I always joke with my clients and say, listen, you're good with muscles, I'm good with money, right? And that's what I'm here to help you with. And whether it's me or finding someone that you trust that can help you with that, right? The best owners I've seen delegate. They're able to delegate, focus on what they do best, which is run their businesses and grow their businesses, because that's going to make them a heck of a lot more money than it is going to be paid to someone, $5 or $10,000 a year to do it for them, and they can go make 50, right? That's the best owners. They focus on delegating those types of things, whether it's my work or whatever it is in their business. They really understand what they're good at, what they're not good at, and they have the humility to say, okay, I'm able to ask for help.
When you're working with clients, especially in healthcare setting, what's the biggest frustrations you have? Like some of the stuff where you're like, if you just let me do this for you, you would do so much better.
Yeah, they're usually pretty good once they agree to move forward. I think there's a little bit of a hesitancy of, because they're not taught these things, and the perception of our industry, which I know there is a bad rep, unfortunately, with advisors. Like they're gonna, charge high fees and they're gonna charge commissions and all this type of stuff. So I think that's maybe their hesitancy of like, listen, I'm not the bad guy here. Like I'm doing it a certain way. Let me just explain it to you. So I think that's the hardest part. But I maybe I'll flip your question on what are they really good at, right? And there's a reason why I'm going to say this is I found that once they're able to get over that fear of working with an advisor, working with someone they trust that can help them with their, investments, their money, their planning, they're really, really good at taking action. And I think, I mean, I guess, hypothesis on this is that all day long, all they're trained to do is to get patients to follow through on a plan of care, right? Patient that's not responding well, how do they adapt? So almost internally, subconsciously, when I'm telling them and taking them through my financial plan of care, which we'll get into, they're saying like they're able to implement that. They're the fastest people to, when I say, hey, let's do this, they're done. Like, hey, you got to sign this document, or we got to do this transfer, we got to, set up this bank account or high yield savings, whatever it is. It's usually done within like a couple days. Let me tell you, I got clients that aren't in healthcare that'll take a couple months. And that action threshold, I always say imperfect action is better than a perfect plan, because the people that actually take action on things are making progress, and everything looks great on paper. But on paper, it means nothing, right? If you don't actually do what we're talking about and implement it, it's just a piece of paper at the end of the day. Like, oh yeah, you're gonna have $3 million when you retire, and if you do this, but then they don't actually do the thing that we talked about doing. So I've noticed that that is something really good that they do. I would just say it's the not knowing, which I think holds them back a little bit. So that's really why it's so important to find someone that you trust. I always say vet a few people out. See what they do, why they do it. I also think I have a competitive advantage in the sense of I work exclusively with that market, so I can speak your language. I can make things simple, um, go at your pace, and just make it digestible, because it is a complex topic. Before I got in the industry, I didn't know what this stuff was. No one really taught it. You get in a career, you learn your job, maybe you got a 401k, and that's, you're listening to your buddies and your family and friend on what they do, and that's telephone game as it is. So, to kind of, like I said, go back to your question, I think it's just in beginning phases of getting them to actually commit, because they get over that fear of, I'm okay with not knowing. That kind of goes into that Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you're an expert in and I say you're an expert in muscles, I'm an expert in money, right? But because you know so much and you're so educated, you assume that that's the same thing when it comes to your finances. And I'm not saying that to insult anyone and saying that you don't. I've seen people that are actually really good with that in healthcare because they spent the time to learn it, but maybe they don't know certain things or they're unaware of what they don't know. So I would say that's the biggest thing in the beginning is getting over that and being willing to ask for help and say maybe I don't know it all. So that's kind of what I would say on that aspect.
See on social media around finance
Yeah.
drives you absolutely crazy. 'Cause that is
Yeah. Yes, yes. It amazes me because, in our industry, an advisor is licensed. We're subject to things like FINRA and the SEC. And, anyone with a camera and a microphone can go out there and just start spewing things and not really have many ramifications as long as they say, this is not investment advice or something in it. So I got TikTok and I used to be a anti TikTok guy. Like I was like, I don't want it. I don't do it. And then of course, there was the guy that was doing Instagram reels. So I always say I got 2 week delayed TikToks. But I'll just be scrolling through and I honestly use that to my advantage of like what is actually going on out there and what are people being fed so that when I'm meeting with them, I know, right? I almost look at it as like a competitive advantage of that's why I have it. But I'm seeing a lot of things, you need to be careful. And here's why. There's a lot of content out there that isn't necessarily wrong or bad, but it's applied incorrectly. Meaning, I don't think life insurance is this evil thing that you should never own. And, there's IULs and VULs that people always talk about. And the whole becoming your own bank thing, I think that's a little bit tough to, get on that train. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It just means that if every Joe and Jill goes and implements it, it might not fit their situation. Same thing with investing, right? Everyone says you should buy, this index fund and, pay low expense ratios and never pay an advisor and you're going to have $10 million if you do this. And it's like, well, I've seen people that go invest money that should be, saving for a house and safe. They're investing that in the stock market when their goal is a year away and they don't understand that sometimes. It's like, well, this thing only goes up or it gets 8% a year. And they assume, like, oh, it's going to do better than my savings account that's going to do 1% or 0.01%. So a lot of times there's that advice out there, or I shouldn't say it's not advice because they're saying it's not, which is like if I go out there and say that stuff, like I'm out of a job, right? I'm fired, getting rid of my firm, everything like that. So we have to sit here and almost like scream from the sidelines, like you can't say that. Like, why are you saying that? You're going to cause more harm to people. There's just a lot of stuff. All I'll say on that is, listen, if you're gonna go on there and you're gonna consume it, which is pretty much impossible not to, because I consume it and I just kind of laugh at some things, but just always go back and sit down and think, how does it apply to me? And if you're not sure, find someone that you can work with and then ask them those questions. Like if you have an advisor, I tell my clients, like if you hear something and you have a question, like bring it to me. It happens all the time now. I actually had a client, they're saying like, oh, like someone at work was telling me this, like, should I do it? I'm like, well, actually, no, and here's why. And then they're like, oh, yeah, that's a good point. Right. So you need to take that step back and not look at it in a vacuum, and be careful of just taking what someone says and just implementing it right away because it sounds amazing. Right.
who has the actual credibility. Yeah, no, and that's one
Correct.
I like. I know Ray Dalio talks a lot about that. It's like, who are you getting your advice
Hmm.
from? Are they credible, and how do you know if they're credible or not? So it's like, yeah, I found some random dude who says I should put my life savings into crypto. It's like he did well, so let me do that too.
Yeah.
It's okay. But
Yeah.
yeah, right. So like, who's credible? How do you vet people? And then there is this aspect. I mean, I don't think this should be as big of a problem for people in healthcare, but just society as a whole. Like, do some homework and do some
Yes.
research, right? And so that's an aspect too, where like it's just very interesting because even being in medicine, healthcare is so scrutinized nowadays, and a doctor will say something. Somebody's got like maybe 8 years, or even as a physical therapist, we're getting 6 to 7 years of education. It's
Yeah.
like, I don't know if I trust you, but then some random dude I saw on TikTok, like I'll take their word for it. And it's crazy, right? So it does
Yeah.
show like where people are getting their resources, what's the trust factor, and just overall, like how do you actually influence people to actually just want to do the right thing and bring some value to
Absolutely.
them at the same time. So when you're looking at advice outside of just some of the frustrating things with social media, though, is like, what are some things that people just you wish they knew, more of, whether they're an employee or an owner? And then after that, I kind of want to start diving into like your program a little bit more specifically as well.
Yeah, so I mean, what they would know more of is, I would say, and to kind of go back to that point, I wanted to make a real quick point of like, think about it from your perspective, right? You always tell your patients, don't go to Dr. Google, right? And I actually say that with my clients. It's like, don't go to Dr. Google. Well, essentially what you're doing is you're taking advice from social media. You're going to Dr. Google just on money, right? So, like you said, vet that, like take what you tell patients and apply that to your life. And sometimes we're human, it happens. I get it. We're not all perfect, and I'm far from it. I'll tell people that on the front end, but you know, just making sure, like I've gotten to a point now where anytime like I get injured or hurt because I'm still playing, I'm an athlete, I run, I work out, like I just ran a half marathon in New York City and I had an Achilles issue. And I called my client and I said, hey, listen, I know I should be calling you. Like, can I come see you? And he only works with like high level athletes in high school and college. And he was like, yeah, dude, like come in. So that's like the same thing I want to practice what I preach. So if I'm the guy that's saying, PTs, you got to come to me for your money, but I'm going on YouTube and looking up like how to rehab Achilles tendonitis and trying to implement it, like it doesn't really work that way. So to that point on there, and the question you asked about what I wish they knew more about was, you know, do some self education. I think that's great because that also helps us as advisors of like, if you know the basics and you learn that, we're never going to, number one, if you don't, we're never going to, at least I can speak for myself, make you feel dumb about it. I love educating, right? I love talking about it, making sure you always say like, know what you own and why you own it, right? That's a big thing. Um, but do some basic education and then just, do your research, right? When you're going to work with someone, vet them, be able to how long have you been in business? And I don't think that's really the biggest thing nowadays, like how long have you been in. I'm someone that's young, so I can kind of go into why that might be an advantage or disadvantage. But understand, like, do they specialize in what you do? That's going to be huge. If you're looking for a doctor, and it's almost like the same thing in healthcare, right? If I go to my primary care physician and I say, listen, I'm having chest pain, and they send me to a podiatrist, like, be like, it doesn't make any sense. So do the same thing with your finances. Like, find someone that specializes in working with you, right? Specialize in working with PTs, OTs. I have some doctors that I can work with just because I know them, but there might be someone out there that only works with cardiologists and they've got this whole plan specializing with cardiologists. Like, look for that type of person to work with rather than the generalist who's going to maybe have 15 different types of clients. They'll be good, but not great. So that's right, and that's kind of leads into our next, kind of want to tie it into what you were going to ask me about my process and how that works and how you know I work with people like yourself and PTs in the industry. What that process looks like. Yeah, so so basically, like I said previously, when I got into the career, I was an athlete and went through the process of patient. So when I was sitting down and I had the process that I was taught from senior advisors, and it's all similar, but I found like I need to speak their language, kind of like PTs when they're sitting down with a patient and they start, I know for me, if you start naming body parts and things and muscles, and I'm gonna just look at you like, what did you just say? Like, tell me what I need to do, how I need to do it in my terms. So when I went through, and it was almost like a refresher going through that rehab process previously of like, how can I make this as simple as possible for them to understand? So I came up with the financial plan of care. Right? CARE is an acronym where C is clarifying, right? Clarifying your goals. E is evaluating where your finances are, right? And this is a 4-step process. It's not always 4 meetings, but 4 steps is we're not starting with the recommendations or diving into how much you have invested. It's like, what do you want out of your life? Where do you want to be in 10 years? And why? That's really the beginning of the process. And I think when you're looking for an advisor, find someone that's going to start there, right? Goal based planning. They're going to start with your goals in mind of like, what do you want to achieve, right? Maybe I just had a PT come on, he wants to open a business in the next couple of years with his brother, right? And I have someone who told me, like, I don't really have a desire to. I just want to make sure that I have enough to send my kids to college. I can buy a house in a couple of years. I can go on 2 vacations a year, like, and that's what they want. Their plans are going to be completely different. But if I just only look at like their investments and say, I can get you a better rate of return and this and that, like, that's not going to get them to their goals quicker. right? So that C process of clarifying their goals. E, evaluating where they're at. This is where we're diving under the hood and saying, think of this like an eval, right? Patient comes in, they're referred to you from a physician, and they're saying like, listen, they're having, knee pain, right? And they come to you and they say, okay, like what's going on? The good clinicians I found just being in the industry is they find out, it's not that you want to heal your knee. It's that the grandmother that's coming to see you, she wants to play with her grandkids. That's what she cares about. The knee is just a means to an end, essentially. So we have to figure out and get, into the nitty gritty of what's going on. That's that second step. Then it's really me going back and doing my homework. And this is where I'm developing that plan of care. Same thing like a healthcare clinician's going to eval a patient. Then they're going to say, okay, like they might make some recommendations on the front end, but typically they're going to put together a formal plan of care. Right? They're going to go back, put together that plan of care. Maybe it's 10 weeks, 14 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever it is. And then they're going to present that. And in our space, it's a little bit more formal. If I'm going to present my screen, and you're not going to do that in the clinic, right? It's going to be, hey, here's the exercises we're going to do. Get on the bike, warm up, foam roll, whatever it is. That's that recommendations of like, here's where you are today. Here's where you want to be 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 2 years from now. What the heck are we going to do to actually get there? And then how are we going to do it, right? We're going to break it up into bite-sized pieces. That's a big thing for me as well. Is like, I always tell, this is not going to all happen on the front end, right? We're not going to uplift your entire financial life day one because number one, no one's going to be willing to do that. It's just scary as it is to talk about this stuff. So if I tell you, hey, you got to change your investments here, and then you got to implement this insurance, and then you got to stop spending your money on vacations, they're just going to be like, this guy sucks. And like, I'm going to go find someone else. So it's like, what can we start with small wins, right? I remember when I was rehabbing my ACL, the small wins were so powerful, right? I didn't get out of ACL surgery and go run a marathon or even walk. Like I had to recover a little bit, and me just getting up and going to the bathroom was an achievement, right? Like being able to get out of my bed, get out of pain meds or anything like that, and just go and be good and move up and down a stair, right? And then it was okay, like I can walk on crutches. And then it was okay, I can walk without the crutches. And then it was okay, now I can, dial on the knee brace where they can basically loosen it to certain degrees. It was like, okay, like I don't need it to be restrictive anymore. And then it was out of the brace. And then before you know it, it was 9 months from now and I was back on the field. But like I didn't just do that overnight. So same thing happens with when it comes to your financial planning. Like you're not going to change everything day one, but if you know where you want to be and you have a vision, my vision as an athlete was I need to get back on that dang field playing what I love. In your life, it might be like I need to be able to support my family and buy a house in the next 3 years and be able to have enough money coming in the door to take a couple vacations and enjoy life, but also not compromise my retirement. Okay, how do we do that? And then I got other people who are like, I never want kids. I'm okay. We're married. We're, modest people. We want to travel and we just want to have enough money to do that and then retire at 50. So it's really understanding that that's the R in the care. And then E is, in my opinion, the most important part, which is basically like, again, it's more of like evaluating. I'm sorry, I said A before E. So it was assess finances. That's the assessment. This last part is E, which is evaluating the progress. So to kind of go back on that so everyone's not confused, I know how to spell. CARE, assess finances. Yeah, exactly. Assess finances, recommend strategies, and then evaluate progress, right? And that evaluation of the progress, not an initial eval, but think of it like every quarter, I get together with my clients and we sit down and say, what worked, what didn't work, and what do we need to change? Right? Think of it like I do a lot of analogies because people just understand, especially in healthcare, of like, you have a patient coming in, some patient's going to respond great to certain things. And then another one's going to come in for the same exact injury or thing that they need to get fixed, and they're going to respond horribly. If you just sit there and say, no, this is how we always done it, we have to do it this way, and this is what I was taught in school, well, you're going to have very different results, and you're probably going to lose a patient here and have a raving fan over here, right? Why not have two raving fans and be adaptable, right? That's why you went to school. It wasn't to be rigid, but it was to be able to think on the fly and come up with different strategies for different types of patients. Same thing with me in my practice and working with healthcare clinicians. It's, what's going to work for you? And if it doesn't work, we're going to kick it out and we're going to try something else, right? And we're going to make sure we're actually monitoring it, because what happens most of the time is, people do it themselves. They typically, maybe they have a spreadsheet and they track their investments. They either do it too much or not enough. That's what I always see. It's either they're checking their investments every single day, which is, in my opinion, horrible to do, right? Yeah, now it's like Robinhood ruined that for everyone. It's like, oh, you get an alert when the market's up 5%. It's like, oh my goodness, or down, and then everyone sells. And then there's also, not checking it enough. It's like, oh, wait, we should probably do the budget this month. We haven't done it in like 2 years. It's like almost like an accountability partner of, I will be here to hold you accountable. But at the end of the day, I want everyone to understand this that's listening and thinking about, and this will tie into what to look for in an advisor. You're never giving up control. It is always on you. And I'll always tell my clients that, like, listen, you're paying me to be the guide. I'm your guide along this journey. You still got to climb the mountain, right? You still have to maneuver and make the adjustments that I'm recommending, but it's ultimately up to you. I can help you with certain things, obviously, but it's ultimately at the end of the day up to you, and you own that reality, right? You're going to own your dream reality at some point if you take the recommendations, because I know how to get you there, but you actually have to do it. And that's what I see a lot of healthcare clinicians be really good at, is actually implementing those things. When there's like, all right, let's change it, they get it, like they're able to do it. I've had other clients and work in different fields, and they're so rigid and stubborn. Sometimes they won't implement it, or it'll take them 6 months, and all of a sudden they're like, I wish I did that. I'm like, yeah, I know. You know, but then you have a lot of times PTs, they're just really good at it. And that's why I love working with them too, is that they just understand it. They get it. They'll ask questions, and I want them to understand why we're doing it. But once they get it, it's like, all right, let's go. Let's do it. Like they'll get excited, which is great.
Really good stuff that I really do think is just pertinent for people in general, which is, you talked about having a long-term plan, but then where for a lot of people it could be very daunting. They're like, all right, how the hell do I kind of stay on track for something for 15 or 20 years? So, looking at that ACL recovery analogy, so to speak, of like, all right, what's the small stuff that we're doing along the way? So if you have a goal, even in life, or maybe it's just I want to lose weight. It's very easy to be like, hey, I've been doing this for 6 weeks and I didn't lose the 30 pounds yet. It's like, all right, well, there's other stuff, the smaller wins we can, like you said, like getting out of bed with no pain or what have you. So it's being able to look at those micro wins and set up like some small little achievements along the way to keep us moving. Because I do feel like that's why a lot of people give up. They don't see the gains quick enough, especially nowadays where we have an instant gratification mentality. So they stop. So I really love that you said that there. And then, really being able to, you had mentioned this a few times, and is being able to speak other people's language, and it's not just necessarily great advice for business, which it really is. It's like, why can't I build reports? Because you're speaking in a way that doesn't resonate. But just even in general with life, it's how do I connect with people? It's sound like them, right? And speak like them. And that's definitely, something I've seen in healthcare that is actually hard for a lot of people, where it's, I don't understand why maybe patients are not coming back, or they're not maybe referring other people in. It's like they don't understand what you're saying. Like they don't understand the treatment plan. You're talking about, like you said, like muscles and tendons and nerves and what have you. Like, how do I get better? Like, just tell me, like,
Yeah, they don't care. Yeah.
how long is it going to take for me to get better, and what are we going to do to actually get me there? So I really appreciate you saying that, because that is actually, I think, a very utilized approach that people just don't take, which is crazy to think.
Yeah, I think sometimes people try to like, and especially in the field of planning and investing and whatever you want to call it, right? Complexity is often mistaken as like the best option, right? Sometimes when people think like, oh, I got this investment going on in crypto, and I got like this fund where it's actively invested, whatever it is, someone that sold them it, and they think that is complexity equals success, right? And a lot of times, most of the time it's not, because they can't stick to it, number one, and they don't know what they own. So if things go wrong, they don't understand why potentially like it's going wrong, and logically like, oh, this is why it's happening. It's not the end of the world, right? We understand the last 100 years, you look at the market, it's going to go up and it's definitely going to go down. But if you stick the course, people are rewarded, right? The patient get rewarded by the impatient who sell, right? So a lot of times keeping things simple and understanding that. And once I realized that, and this kind of goes towards clinicians as well, like the best private practice owners that I talk to, like they can speak their patient's language in their terms, right? They can take a complex subject And that's almost like a sign of someone who's really intelligent and knows what they're doing when they can take a complex subject and make it really simple at like a third grade level, because that's how we implement things in our lives. If I go to I don't know anything about cars, right? If my car started making a noise, like I'd show up to the mechanic and, I know they get a bad rep too. And it's like, they're always trying to but like, if they can tell me what's going on and what I need to do to fix it, I'm like, sure, yeah, do it. Like I don't need an explanation on like what the carburetor, I think that's a term, is doing. Like I don't need that. That's just gonna like I'm gonna sit there and then I'm gonna say, so what do I need to do? Like, can you do it? Same thing when it comes to your patients, and same thing with financial planning. If you're sitting there saying like, I have no idea. This guy was telling me about this fund and what it does this, and we're gonna own this stock and then this, and we're gonna do these crazy things and set up a trust. It's like, whoa. Most of the time, people just need simplicity in their life because they're going to implement it, not complexity, right? So that's to your point. That's the reason why I started using the language, because when I first started, I kept thinking like, why is no one resonating? Like, what am I doing? Like, I sound smart. What's going on? And it's like, yeah, they hate you because you sound so smart. Like you need to speak their language. And then it started clicking, and it's been really great to work with a lot of people in healthcare. Can be tough at first for them, but once we start to build up that relationship, it becomes really rewarding.
Dude, this was great. I could probably do this for a few more hours.
Yeah, I know. Got like a Rogan episode. We're going for 4 hours.
I mean, like you said, it's just information that people need that we're not getting. But
Absolutely.
if somebody wants to connect with you, what's the best way to do that? If they either want to work with you, or at least just maybe starting to follow you a little bit on social media and start educating themselves a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm really active on LinkedIn. That's always the best place. I know some people aren't as active on there. So, I do have YouTube channel that I'm starting to pick up and film on there. So it's going to be some more content coming out there. But, LinkedIn's the number one place. I always direct people there. That's where I'm most active. I'm very responsive. Send me a message. You're never going to get like a pitch of, if you send me a message and say, hey, I heard you on the episode, I'd love to connect. Like, great. I'll ask you if you have any questions, if things you want to talk about. And then if anyone wants to work with me, I always say I give an initial call, right? It's a quick call, 15 minutes, doesn't even make sense. Can I even help you, right? It's not like we're going to get on the call and it's going to be like, all right, here's the fee, here's what we're going to do, ready to sign. Like, no, I want to make sure I'm a good fit for you too, right? Because I have referred people out that aren't good fits to people that I know. Like, so don't feel that pressure of, reaching out. And I'm always looking to make connections, whether you're an owner, I know a lot of people also are looking, am I going to go non-clinical? That's a big topic in the industry as well. Am I going to start my own thing? I do have clients in that space. So if you have questions, I have connections there. So I'm an open book, but direct everyone to LinkedIn. That's the most active place that I'll be starting to. And in my world, compliance is a really big thing. So it's a little tougher to get on all the platforms. I can't just go on TikTok and start posting. But LinkedIn's a good spot to start.
Well, John, I appreciate it, man. This is awesome.
Appreciate you having me. Thanks.